Oh, let me kill my video too.
Yeah, I gotta do that also.
I gotta sneeze now, of course.
Yeah, we'll do it then. You know.
Okay. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another year, another edition of Puck Talk with Pickens and Turner. I'm Dave Turner, along with Pat Pickens. I know I'm glad to have hockey back. Pat, I'm sure you are too, huh?
We talked about this off air a little bit, but I'm really more excited about having to be able to talk about the on ice play. The games start this week, and we're gonna get to see Connor McDavid in St. Louis Thursday. We're gonna get to see the defending Stanley Cup champions a few times, including opening a building in Brooklyn Friday night.
Yeah, there should be some fun things. And of course, before we get into our Eastern Conference preview here, where both divisions seem like they could be a little bit wide open, have a lot of contenders. Pat, real quick though, the two changes on the ice in terms of the game, the goal review, where they can allow or disallow goals on inadvertent interference and whistles like that. And of course, the 3-on-3 overtime. Pat, just real quick, what are your thoughts on those coming into the season?
Well, it's interesting because the NHL didn't allow the coaches' challenge mechanism and the review as far as the first in preseason. So it's really interesting to see how that gets utilized because a lot of coaches said they would use it in certain spots, but they didn't have it at their disposal in the preseason. I think it's great for the league. Everybody talks about getting it right, and do it. Getting the calls on the ice the right way, and I think this is probably the fairest way to do it. I don't think that they blow a lot of calls officials, but just to get it right, everyone likes that. And the 3-on-3 overtime is going to be wild. I was fortunate enough to watch one of those test run overtimes in Brooklyn earlier in the year, and there's going to be a lot of goals scored probably in the first 2 to 3 minutes of the extra session. I just think that there's so much space, there's so much skill, and coaches have no idea. I mean, Dave, we go back to when they went from 5-on-5 to 4-on-4, and how coaches tried to combat that initially, and how they were each given the point to try and avoid ties, of course. But obviously, the standings mechanism changed with the shootout, and the points became less valuable. When it went 4-on-4, I think there's just going to be more of an opportunity for 3-on-3, and it's going to take longer than for coaches to catch up to it, I think. What do you think?
Yeah, I think just to finish with you here on the 3-on-3, I happen to like it a lot, just because it will probably decrease the amount of shootouts. Everyone who's listened to our podcast knows I am not a fan of the shootout, so anything that involves less with the skill competition is nice. The one thing I like about it the most, sure, the forwards will have more space. I like the idea of seeing these elite puck-moving defensemen being able to really kind of use their game, where they'll have room to operate. They can go end to end after getting the puck. I think it'll be really interesting to see what some of those guys can do. And as for the goal review, it's going to be shaky at first. I think you're going to have a lot of questionable decisions and reviews that are, wait a second, they're not going to know how to implement it, but I think eventually it will be good. Yeah. But moving on now to the East, where we start with the Metro Division. Pat, we're going to start with the Rangers here. Are they the team to beat still? Or at least do they have people on their coattails? Because to me, it seems like the year that the Rangers have to get this done, or else they might see teams passing them, even in this year as well.
I like some of the moves the Rangers made this past offseason. I like Emerson Edom. I like they addressed their bottom six forward depth. Their defense is very good. I agree with you that this has got to be the year. Henrik Lundqvist is aging quickly. He's approaching his mid-30s, which goaltenders tend to give out at that point. They see a lot of pucks, and Lundqvist got a good break last year with the vascular injury. He got to feel a little fresher. I spent some time around the Rangers already. They seem to get the idea that this is their year. Everybody's pointing at Chris Kreider to have a big breakout season. I can see that happening. Matt Zuccarello told me he's feeling better. He's in good shape. He's ready to go. I like the Rangers still. I like their skill. I do like their depth top to bottom. Tanner Glass isn't going to be playing every night for them this year. There aren't a lot of holes in the Rangers right now, but there are a lot of teams around them that have got better.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing about the Rangers is that they're going to be right there again for sure. And though maybe they're not going to be quite as dominant, might not be a President's Trophy winner this year, sometimes that's a year that tends to work for some teams, is when all of a sudden they kind of settle in and maybe the pressure isn't quite as much in terms of like, well, maybe they're not good enough. And all of a sudden that's when they get it done.
Yeah.
Certainly they're deeper this year. The health of the defense will be an issue, and of course, keeping Lundqvist in the net this year will be huge. But I think this is a team that absolutely is going to be there right into the end, and it wouldn't surprise me if they go on and win a Stanley Cup. Though I'm not going to end up picking them, as we'll find out. I still think that this team has every bit of chance to hoist the Stanley Cup at the end of the year.
I agree. Now we'll move on to the team that almost unseated them last year in the Metro Division final, the Washington Capitals. Dave, we both like the Capitals a lot. I like their grit. I like their size. They're physical, and they only got more physical, replacing Joel Ward on their top line with TJ Oshie this year. Their defense is pretty solid. Braden Holtby had a breakout year last year. Dave, what do you think about the Caps?
I really like this team, and it's going to start with Braden Holtby for me. What you saw from him in the playoffs was that he can be a legitimate goaltender that can steal a series. I mean, he had some games that were sensational where he was, if he saw the puck, it wasn't going in. And if that's the kind of goaltending they're going to get from him for the next few years, and now what they've added this year in terms of Oshie and Justin Williams and things like that, I think they're going to be even better because you're seeing Holtby turn himself into what is probably, I think you can make the case, at least by the end of the year, a top 5 goaltender, quite possibly. I think the sky's the limit for this team this year. I really do.
I agree with you. I think Washington's really good. I love the addition of Justin Williams, especially for a team that's had such trouble winning Game 7s. Their defense is pretty solid, and it got they lost Mike Green, but Mike Green at that point was a third pair defenseman. They made a fiscally responsible move by not re-signing him. I would pick Washington to come out of the Metro, and I'll transition to this, if not for Pittsburgh, because I don't know where people are down on Pittsburgh this year, because I think they're the team to beat probably in the Metro.
Yeah, there's something that scares me about Pittsburgh. I feel like this team easily could be a 112-point team this year.
Yeah.
Or they could struggle just because the pressure on them is so immense right now because they've added the next piece, which is Phil Kessel, a guy who certainly has taken his lumps in Toronto, but now he comes in and he's going to be on a line with Sidney Crosby. People are thinking Phil Kessel should score 50 goals this year. And that's really, I think, what people believe he could do. It scares me that this team with the pressure it could get to them. Look, their top 6 is fantastic. Even their third line is really good. Yeah. I mean, you have guys like Bonino, who's really going to be nice there, and Pascal Dupuis, when he comes back, is going to be a third liner probably. The thing that scares me though is the defense, because Olli Maatta still kind of banged up. Chris Letang, we know how good he is offensively, but
Norris Trophy winner.
Yeah, and to me also Marc-Andre Fleury, as much as he's been good, we have to see it for another big playoff run with him. I just feel like this team, either they're gonna be right there or they're gonna really struggle. I don't think there's a middle ground with them.
I think it's the former, because I like their bottom 6 moves they made. They went out, they got Eric Fair from Washington, good bottom 6 player. You mentioned their third line, Matt Cullen, they have center depth. Their defense I like a lot if Letang's healthy, if Maatta's got sent down because of cap compliance, but he'll be back up shortly. Their defense is better than you think. And don't forget how close that series with the Rangers was without Kessel and, some health issues, and without the healthy defense. I mean, those are 5 one-goal games against the Rangers a year ago. Dave, the darling of the Metro last year were the New York Islanders. They're moving to a new building this year, but not much else has changed. What do you think?
I like this team offensively. I think they're going to be better offensively as some of the younger guys are really finding their touch. I think Ryan Strome is really going to have a breakout year this year, but they scare me in net. They really do. And when you compare them with the other teams that we've already mentioned in their own division, I don't know if they quite stack up. Sure, they'll be exciting. They're going to play a lot of 6-4 games perhaps this year. But defensively, they're good, and I think Nick Leddy going to continue to improve. But for me, I think that they are definitely a step below not only the three teams we mentioned already, but also Columbus.
I agree with you. We'll get to Columbus in a minute. I like the addition of Marek Zidlišky a lot for their power play. If Ryan Pulak's not necessarily ready to play big power play minutes, I'm a big fan of Travis Hamonic. You know, he's really developed an offensive game that is very good. John Tavares, what's not to? The only thing I'll say about John Tavares that I don't like is he wears Crocs. So everything else besides that, John Tavares is good in my book. I don't like them in goal. I think they're going to struggle. We'll get to the transition with the new building in a minute. I don't really like how if the Islanders got such a boost off the building, the Coliseum last year in the last season there, and the fans are really lukewarm about this move to Brooklyn. It's going to it's a divisive issue at this point with the Islanders. And I'm not sure that they can, withstand all that. Plus, if you look back at the Islanders haven't made the playoffs 2 years in a row since the lockout, since the season-ending lockout. So, they've had glimpses, they've shown flashes, and whenever there's expectation with the Islanders, it almost seems like they wilt under them. I do think the Islanders are probably the fifth team in the Metro. They're probably going to be a playoff team, I would say, but they have to withstand this onslaught of turmoil that's going on between the move and, like you said, in goal. If they're young and dumb enough maybe to overcome it, but we'll see. We'll close with Columbus. I really like Columbus. I know there are people who are down on them because of their, the big move with Brandon Saad. They gave up a lot in hindsight, but their top six is fantastic.
Yeah, it really is.
Their goaltending is elite. When you look at Bobrovsky and McElhinney's pretty solid too. It just, to me, it comes down to what we get from Scott Hartnell, or what the Blue Jackets get from Scott Hartnell, and what they get from their defense. Like you said, Ryan Murray has been a major disappointment, not in that he's bad, but in that we don't know how good he is simply because he hasn't been healthy. Former top 10 pick. I like Cam Atkinson a lot. I like Saad a lot. I like Ryan Johansson a lot. Jack Johnson, was on the show. We're big fans of him. But besides that, they're a little thin. Is Nick Foligno going to give you 30 goals again? Is David Clarkson going to do it? Score goals, period. He's going to be an upgrade over. I mean, is he going to be worth what you're paying him in that? There's a lot of question marks with Columbus. But the thing with Columbus is they were so close to playoffs last year, and the injuries were so debilitating last year. You just have to assume that's not going to happen again. Good for Yarmo and John Davidson for going for it. I think they're a playoff team. I don't think they're a cup contender, though.
Yeah, I wouldn't go as far as to say that they're a real contender, but I'll say this. This is going to be a very physical team. I would not want to match up against them in the playoffs just because they're going to wear you down.
Yeah.
Even especially if you're a finesse team, if it ends up being a Pittsburgh versus Columbus with that kind of budding rivalry as well, they're going to come at you. I mean, they have guys who are really going to try to wear you down. I mean, I've always loved Brandon Dubitsky. I think he's a guy that just makes players better, and I love the way he competes every night. Having him hopefully healthy will be a big thing for them. Defensively, they do scare me because I don't think there's anyone really who is an elite two-way player on that team, but they have the goaltender tending to make up for it. Yeah. This team will be good, but again, I wouldn't consider them a major player, but you never know. I mean, this is a young team that could surprise, but I'd have to say that they probably – I'm going to pick them to finish fourth, actually, but I don't know if they're quite there. And, of course, now just to get through the other teams here, I guess the team that would probably finish sixth here is the Flyers. Pat, just a little bit on them real quick.
I like some of the moves. I think their building is the important thing with the Flyers. First-year head coach out of college, Dave Hextall. Not sure what we're going to make of that. We've already seen some of the moves they made. They waived Andrew McDonald in a cost-cutting move. These guys are going to play. It's going to sink or swim this year for the Flyers. There's a lot of expectation. I don't think their defense is still good enough, but it's getting there. Their goaltending is solid. I don't know if they're going to score enough goals, and I think I think you're right. They're probably going to finish sixth.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're going to be a decent team this year. I really do. I think they'll play competitive hockey every night.
Yeah.
Look, Mason has been much better in goal than I think anyone ever expected.
Pretty good too.
Yeah, I mean, they're going to be a thorn in some people's sides. They're going to win some games. I don't think they're going to be a playoff team, but I don't think they'll be far out. That line, the first line is good. If they could ever find some secondary scoring, they could be dangerous. The young defense isn't quite there for them, and I think that's when they'll take the step forward. Is when some of the young guys, the Morans, the Gostisbeheres, they start to take that step forward.
Gostisbehere had a great preseason too, but he's that far away. He's not very far away.
No, it could be this year that we start to say his name because he's going to be something special, I think.
I would say this is a successful season for the Flyers if they could offload some of the bad contracts, the Shen deals, and like I said, maybe McDonald, maybe LeCavalier. But I think a successful year would involve offloading a bunch of contracts.
And just real quick here with the last two teams who probably will be vying for what could be perhaps the worst record in the entire sport, the Devils and the Carolina Hurricanes. As for the Devils, look, they're actually the third youngest team now as of the opening day rosters, which is amazing considering where they were a couple years ago. But they're going to have to take their lumps. They're good in goal. The defense should be improved, but scoring is certainly going to be the issue with this team.
I agree. It's one of those things that they're going to be really kind of – I think they could be a thorn in people's side. I think they're going to lose a lot of 2-1, 3-1, 2-0 games because Corey Schneider's that good, and he's good enough to keep the Devils in games. But, I talked with Ray Shero, the GM, and John Hines, the head coach, in the offseason, and they both kind of alluded to the fact that this is going to be a bad year, basically. That it's not so much necessarily a bad year as much as this is kind of the year where the Devils find out what they have. And I like the Toulouse signing. I like locking up Adam Larson, but like you said, we're going to see what the Devils have, and I don't think it's going to be very good, but we're going to find out. As for Carolina, I don't know how that team's going to compete on a night in, night out basis.
No.
Now, to be fair, they have a lot of contracts that are coming off the books after this year. We might start hearing some talk for Eric Stahl getting traded. We might hear some Cam Ward trade talk. I'm sure we will. They made some moves as far as James Wisniewski. They offloaded Semin, we already alluded to. I think the Hurricanes are probably going to be the worst team at least in the East. I don't know. Hannafin, bright spot. Maybe we'll see. Maybe he'll have an Aaron Ekblad type season. But I don't see a lot coming from Carolina.
Yeah, they're going to struggle, no doubt. And I think Eddie Lack might even supplant Cam Ward at some point if they don't even trade him. But now we'll move over to the other division here, the Atlantic, where, of course, Tampa Bay looking to hold off some of the other teams there. Pat, what do you make of this division? Is it Tampa Bay's division, or do they still have a lot of work to do?
I like Tampa Bay. Not a lot of moves coming from Tampa Bay, but they didn't have to because the only real departure – as we all know, was Brendan Morrow, which, basically will keep Tampa Bay out of the penalty box for 4 minutes every night. I like the Lightning. I like the triplets. I love Stamkos, but I don't like the fact that Stamkos is going into the year as a lame duck with the contract. Victor Hedman, Norris' favorite for a lot of people. I could see it. He plays with Anton Strawman, arguably the most underrated defenseman. Upgraded, the backup goaltending with Kevin Poulin. They just picked him up off of waivers because Vasilevsky's hurt right now. Sounds like I feel like they're going to have some injury problems just because they didn't have any injury problems last year. Although the terrifying thing for the rest of the East is that if Jonathan Drouin's really going to play with Stamkos and those two are going to make each other better, they haven't even scratched the surface yet. Because any line if they put Drouin on Stamkos' right with Killorn and then the triplets after that, and then you get a checking line with Callahan and some of those guys with Brian Boyle below it. I mean, like I said, they haven't even started. But I just think it's natural for teams to regress. Ben Bishop, tough injury to be playing with in the Cup final last year. I like them. They're obviously the favorite in the division, but they're going to meet some challenges this year.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be easy. Maybe the natural progression for them would be to just go out and blow people's doors off. I don't think that's going to be the case for them. Just because the cup hangover does exist a little bit, and I think teams are going to be gunning for them. They are now the team that everyone wants to beat every night in the East.
Yep. Yeah.
Especially with their speed. Can we shut them down? Can we counter them on the rush? Look, they're a really, really deep offensive team. Defensively, their first pairing, even second, are pretty good, but it does fall off a little bit. And I wonder if Ben Bishop can do it again this year and keep himself healthy with playing a lot of games, considering that maybe their backup situation isn't exactly great. But look, they're going to be right there. Wouldn't surprise anyone if they make a return trip to the finals. But
in fact, they're the favorite for a lot of people.
Yeah, and moving on to the team where they've gotten a little bit better too is the Montreal Canadiens. For me, this is a team that has obviously a guy in PK Subban who could do so much, but I don't know if I like them enough defensively. Sure, they have Carey Price, who is probably the best goaltender in the league. They're going to score goals, but for some reason, this team, as much as they're going to have a fine regular season. They could even win the division for that matter, but there's just something about this team. I don't see them as a playoff contender. Maybe it's just they don't have the grit or anything like that. But as much as I think they did get better with some of the moves they made, and look, Carey Price is going to keep you in every single game, there's just something that scares me about this team. I just don't know if they have what it takes to beat Tampa Bay, at least right now.
I think that this is Michel Therrien's sink or swim first, basically 2 months, because he's got it coming to him if this team doesn't succeed or thrive in the first month. There's obviously been a lot of talk about his job being in jeopardy basically since he took over there. But I really love Jeff Petrie in that defense. They signed him. They locked him up. I think their moves are flying below the radar here. They're still, they can be heavy with Devontae Smith-Pelly. Semin was a no-risk pickup, and if he's got something to prove here. Some of their bottom six guys are better. Torrey Mitchell, good move. Brian Flynn, Buffalo, good move. Subban is an elite defensive player. He carries Markov. Basically, he carries that pair. Pacioretty's only scratching the surface with him. He's now the captain of the team. And Alex Galchenyuk, how old is that guy? It feels like we've been talking about him for years. I don't even know. I think he's 21. So if this team, to me, is a dark horse that not a lot of people are talking about with, Tampa Bay and Pittsburgh and Washington in the East, I think Montreal is a dark horse. They still have arguably the best player in the whole sport. I wouldn't be stunned to see Montreal, surprise people. Just because it's not that surprising, but it's all the same people. Thomas Buchanan's, steady as she comes. But their depth is a little better. Their goal scoring depth is a little better. And, can Tampa Bay get up to play in Montreal the same way they did last year? I don't know.
Yeah, that's a good point. Moving on now. Look, actually, just before we go, Montreal, again, if there's anyone who I think could exceed their expectations this year, it could be them, just because, look, in that building in the playoffs, anything can happen when you're the home team, that's for sure. But with Detroit, a team who has been a mainstay in the playoffs, anyone who's picked Detroit not to make the playoffs for the last few years has been wrong. So I'm not going to do that because they always find a way. But I feel like Detroit right now is a team in transition. Mm-hmm. They have a guy in Jeff Blashill who comes in who seems like he's going to be a great coach. And they're trying to get younger, but because some of the key pieces on this team are getting older.
Yep.
And you almost feel like maybe this is the year finally that they fall off. But look, they still have pretty good depth. They can score. The goaltending does scare me, but they have two guys that have proven that they can be pretty good at any given point. I don't know if I'd necessarily call Detroit a contender to win the East, but I certainly think that they'll be around.
I think you're right. Look, you can't pick them to not make the playoffs, especially in that division. I'm a little nervous about Datsyuk because it seems like he's been injured every year for the last few. De Kaiser's hurt too, and he's your minutes eater in the back end. I could see a regression because they took Tampa Bay to the seventh game of their series a year ago, and really Tampa Bay probably could have argued that without Tyler Johnson in one of those games that they probably should have lost. I don't think Detroit's going to be a contender. I think they're going to finish third because, like I said, division. But I agree with you that this will be but under Blashill in place of Babcock. Babcock got a lot out of that team last year, and I don't know it wouldn't stun me if the Red Wings missed the playoffs.
No, but it also wouldn't stun me if they do make it.
Right.
I guess now the other team that I've seen kind of all over the board with this team is the Buffalo Sabres, where you have some people who are kind of anointing them as the next Calgary Flames, perhaps, team that comes out of nowhere and does really well. I think you have to be careful with this team because, look, they have Robin Lehner. We all he is potential at this point. We've never really seen it. And look, if he turns out to be a legitimate starting goaltender that can play 60 plus games and be good enough, all right. But for me, if this team is going to make a move, it's because of look what they have down the middle. Ryan O'Reilly, Zemgus Girgensons, Jack Eichel, David Legwand. I mean, look, we always talk about, both you and I, about, being strong down the middle, and this team is. They have some wingers that can play with it as well. Evander Kane, Matt Molson, and Tyler Enos, who does do some good things.
Little guy.
Yeah. I think this team's going to be interesting. I don't know if I want to say they're a playoff team yet, but I think that they're going to play much better hockey. They're not going to be anywhere where they were last year, but I think sometimes it takes a little bit of time to really gel. I don't know if they're quite there yet.
You even left out Sam Reinhart there out of that conversation too. There's a few injuries here. Zach Bogosian, minutes eater, Josh Georges, defenseman. I like them a lot. I think they're going to be there right to the end. Maybe that 9-10 spot in the East, if you will. But I agree with you that they're not building for this year. They're building for next year. But if you go from where they were last year to where they will be at the end of this year, that'll be a tremendous step. And I think the Sabres probably going to finish fourth in the fourth or fifth in the Atlantic, I'd say.
Yeah, they'll be better. And the other young team now that I think we've both talked about, but maybe they fall under the radar just because of Buffalo being the darlings right now, is the Florida Panthers.
Look at the market too. The market doesn't.
Yeah,
help.
Of course, it doesn't help that no one watches their games.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you right now, there's some really, really exciting young players, and maybe if you're listening to this and you haven't really seen much of the Florida Panthers, they're going to be exciting to watch this year. They have the goaltending, they have the ageless mulleted wonder in Jaromir Jagr, and they have some really nice young pieces. I think this is a team that, again, might not make the playoffs, but they're going to be really close, as they were last year. And it wouldn't surprise me at all if they do make the playoffs. Could they finish third? Absolutely, I think. This is a team that, look, Aaron Ekblad, going to be a tremendous, tremendous young player. I like where this team is going. Maybe they're still a year away, but I really do like what I'm seeing from them.
They're stuck in a moment, though, because Jagr is really old and Luongo is getting old, and some of the contracts are bad. Sean Thornton, Dave Bolland, they wanted Dave Bolland to be Brian Boyle, and he's not. But I agree with you. You want to talk about depth down the middle, Bugstad, who, they got injured in the season fell off the cliff last year. Barkov, their defense, like you said, Mitchell, all these guys we've been talking about for years. And then Ekblad, who plays way older than he is. Huberdeau is still there, lest we forget. They just locked him up. We'll get to Florida in a few minutes, though, further.
Yeah, and just to round out this division, I think, Pat, you and I are both in agreement. Ottawa, who was kind of the darlings last year because of the hot goaltending, is probably ready for a step back, you would say, right?
I would say I like their young forwards. I still like Kyle Turris. I still think Mika Zibanejad had a breakout year last year. The contributions from Hoffman and Stone and guys like that, I don't think they can duplicate that. Erik Karlsson had a fantastic year. He is an elite defensive player. Obviously was the Norris Trophy winner, but I don't think they can get the same contributions for some of their kids. I think they're going to regress.
Yeah, I think they had a lot of career, even Turris, who had a ton of potential, when he came over from Arizona and everything. But I think for them, they're going to kind of bottom out a little bit this year and be competitive, but I don't think they're a playoff team. Of course, the always interesting Toronto Maple Leafs, to me, it's the same story with them. Not great defensively. Where are they going in goal? It's going to take time for Mike Babcock to work his magic. I think they'll be more competitive. I think they'll be more structured. But look, they have a long way to go, especially losing a guy like Phil Kessel, which I'm sure a lot of fans in Toronto are happy about. But at the end of the day, you lost a really good player.
Where are the goals coming from is the question. And plus, as much as everyone talks about this as a rebuild for the Leafs, they didn't make any moves except for Dylan Kessel. Phaneuf's still there. Like you said, the two goalies are there. Bozak's there. There's a lot of moves that this team can make. And again, like Philadelphia, this would be a good season if they get rid of if they can offload a few of those deals.
Absolutely. And then the last team is Boston, who, interesting that I'm not necessarily saying I'm going to pick them last, but we're discussing them last right now. Amazing how Boston, who was a team that was kind of the class of the East for a few years there, where they just played such good two-way hockey, and now all of a sudden they're a team that really no one's expecting to make the playoffs. As much as I want to say that I really think this team is falling off, they still have some talent on this team, and they have good goaltending too. Zdeno Chara, the injury hurts them, and also his age, even when he does come back, hurts them. They had to lose Dougie Hamilton, which was a big loss. That's after losing, Boychuk last year. But I don't know if they're necessarily going to be an easy team to beat. I think this is a team that, if they stay healthy and get the goaltending from Tuukka Rask, could absolutely finish third, quite possibly in this division.
I don't agree with you. I think they're going to finish. I think if the best case scenario, they're probably going to finish fourth. Although I heard, I'm hearing that Bolesky's been playing with Krejci and Pastrnak. I like that line. I don't know what you're going to get from Bolesky. I mean, that's last year. Everybody said that screamed career year. The Bergeron line, of course, fantastic. I don't know what they're doing with the moves they made. Zach Ronaldo. They trade, or they had to offload Hamilton, they said, and they re-signed Adam McQuaid to a comparable deal. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I don't know if the Bruins are going to be bad this year. I think they'll regress. I don't think they'll compete for a playoff spot. I think they'll 10th, 11th, 12th in the East. But this is just the start of the fall off for them. And if they fire Claude Julien, who keeps that ship afloat, they're going to be in trouble.
Yeah, he's a good coach, and I think there is a reason why they hung on to him, because they know that they'd be hard pressed to find someone who's better than him. Okay, so Pat, we're gonna run through some of these things really quickly now, but we're gonna take a look at a team to take a step forward and take a step back, each in the Eastern Conference. Pat, who are your two teams here that you think are going to make moves in either direction?
I like Florida. I said it. I don't know about the contracts with Bolin and with Thornton, but they everything you hear from them is that those guys provide leadership. I think Bukestad is going to be healthy for the full season. I think their defense is solid. I think Luongo gives them, confidence in net. And, he was injured too last year, don't forget. So I really like the Panthers to take a step forward, maybe even compete for a playoff spot. The only question really will be, will anyone down there notice? But their depth down the middle, Brandon Peary, Bukestad and Barkov, you can do a heck of a lot worse than that. And then they are wingers, Jokinen, Huberdeau, Yager on the right wing. Going to see Yager would be worth the price of admission. I think they're better defensively this year, although they didn't really make the moves. I think you're going to get another great year from Ekblad. You're going to get, Brian Campbell and Willie Mitchell and guys who are solid. I really like Florida to take a step forward this year. They were that close to the playoffs again last year. And I'm going to say that they'll finish fourth in the Atlantic.
Yeah, that could be. Again, we were big. I know you were big on them, actually. I kind of hopped on later after you convinced me after a few weeks. But
the defense.
It should be interesting with them. For me, it's going to be the Columbus Blue Jackets, just because when you look at what they were able to do with bits and pieces because of the injuries last year, you have to think logically that with all their guys healthy, hopefully, that they should take a step forward. I like this team. I just think they're going to be such a pain to play against. I mean, they can score, but they can get after you. They can bang. I think this is a team that they are going to be there every step with some of these teams. Maybe finishing third in that division. I just like, look, Brandon Saad comes over with the pedigree, playing with a guy like Ryan Johansson now. Dubinsky's back. I love Brandon Dubinsky. I think he's a great player. And then you have guys like Scott Hartnell and David Clarkson that if they had their potential together on the same line in the same year, wow. I mean, you could get a lot of points out of that too. Gregory Campbell coming in there is a nice move. To me, that's a team who I think is really going to take a step forward. Pat, now, who's your team to take the step back?
I think I alluded to it. I think it's Ottawa for sure. I think, like I said, a lot of those guys at career years. Andrew Hammond kind of rode that wave all the way into the playoffs. And then you saw kind of the clock strike midnight for them. I don't think goaltending is their problem because they're deep, very deep in goal with Henderson. And Hammond, maybe he'll be a serviceable backup. They got the kid O'Connor from Boston University, who basically is the future for them. I don't know about offloading Leonard. Maybe it was because they couldn't find any takers for Andrew Hammond. The question mark for me is, what Bobby Ryan are we going to see? Are we going to see Mark Stone put up, 60 points this year? Are these young players who they had going to take steps forward? I mean, we're going to get 60 points from Kyle Turris again. Stone had 64 points last year. Mike Hoffman had basically a Rookie of the year last year. And can they duplicate all that? And under Dave Cameron, is it going to be – we watched Ottawa achieve that level in the lockout year under Paul McLean. They got so caught up in it, and they won the playoff round against Montreal, and they rode that wave, to the second round. And then what happened? The next year they regressed. They did the same thing last year when McLean got fired and Cameron took over. And I like Dave Cameron a lot. But are we going to see that regression from Ottawa? I think so.
I would have to agree with you there. For me, the team that I'm going to go with, and again, I'm going to put a caveat here that I think they're going to be very good and could win the whole thing, but it's the New York Rangers. Why? I don't know. Look, they won the division pretty convincingly. I don't think they're going to have such an easy time doing that this year. I think they're going to regress to the point where, look, Henrik Lundqvist is getting a little older. I don't know if he's going to be able to really stand on his head. And they also don't necessarily have a guy like Cam Talbot that could step in if he gets hurt at all. They're going to have a much tougher time in the division this year. I think they could even end up finishing somewhere around third in this division because Pittsburgh looks better, the Capitals look better, and even Columbus is lurking, as I alluded to. I think the Rangers, though they could even go all the way, I think they're going to take a step back in terms of their point total and just the fact that it's going to be much tougher sledding getting through this division this year. So that should be interesting. And
the Rangers will hear that too because they kind of feel that every year they get picked to regress and every year they're right there. I don't necessarily disagree with you because Washington and Pittsburgh got a lot better. I don't think Columbus is ready to unseat them. I don't think the Islanders are ready to unseat them yet, although there are people out there who have picked them.
Yeah, that is true. All right, so Pat, one more thing before we get done here. We're going to go, what's the most compelling storyline you think going into the season this year out of the East, and who is your team to advance to the Stanley Cup Finals from the Eastern Conference?
I'm going to go off the board here a little bit because I had it initially as the Islanders moved to Brooklyn, which is really interesting to me because that could have ramifications across the board, but I'm going to change my mind and go with Buffalo's emergence, or I'm going to keep a close eye on them because not just because, like I said, the roster is good. I mean, the roster is good. That move, people are going to look back on the Evander Kane deal, and it worked out for Winnipeg. Winnipeg got to the playoffs, and it didn't fracture the locker room. But I think the Sabres are going to be in contention right there to the end. You mentioned the wingers are really good. The defense is almost there. We'll see what we get with Leonard, but if we had that same question mark with Corey Schneider when he got traded to the Devils, and Schneider's proven he's an elite goaltender. We've been waiting for Robin Leonard to be, take that next leap get the opportunity to win a job, and he's got the chance now. So, and all under the guise or the guidance of Dan Bilesma, lest we forget, who basically presided over a spectacular 5-year stretch in Pittsburgh. I mean, he lost his job because his team lost in the second round in the conference finals year after year after year. I mean, the Sabres would love to get there. The Sabres haven't been to the playoffs since 2011, and I would be really surprised if they get there this year, but I would also be very surprised if we don't talk about them a lot this season, and I think that's why I think they're the East's most compelling storyline.
Yeah, they're going to be fascinating to watch because there's just so much that can and can't happen with a young team that you'll never know. And we'll find out every night, and it's going to be ups and downs, but it's going to be interesting for sure. For me, I'm going to stay in the nation's capital for both of my things here. I'm going to go with my compelling story is, can TJ Oshie and Justin Williams be the difference for this team, the Capitals, finally getting over that hump that they haven't been able to do yet? For me, I'm going to say yes because that's the team that I'm picking to win the East. To me, TJ Oshie, a guy who maybe kind of fell out of favor, especially playing on that top line in St. Louis. I think he'll be reinvigorated on this team. Williams has the pedigree. I just love the subtle moves here to make them just a little bit better. Defensively, they're pretty good too. To me, the Capitals are going to be the team that wins the East, and I think it's just going to be interesting to see what TJ Oshie can bring, because he was such a name after the Olympics, and he's kind of fallen off since then. But I think you put him with Alexander Ovechkin, and you're going to see some really filthy things happening that are going to be fun to watch. To me, it's all about the Caps right now.
I picked them when that move got made, but I'm going to go off the board a little bit again. And I said I picked them as a dark horse. I'm going to pick the Canadiens again for the 4th year in a row or something. It's going to happen one of these years. They still have the sports best player, Carey Price. PK Subban is an elite defensive player. I really love that move with Alexander Semin. Low risk, low cost. They're kind of flying below the radar because a lot of the moves the East makes has made Pittsburgh and Washington and the Rangers and Tampa Bay kind of supplanted them out as the darling of the Atlantic. I'm going to take Montreal to come out of the East. In fact, I'm going to take Montreal to beat Pittsburgh in the conference final.
That'd be a hell of a series, that's for sure. Hey, we have rookies coming into this league now who have, for a couple years now, not even seen a Canadian team win a cup while they were alive. Maybe it'll happen this year. It's been a while, so it'll certainly be interesting.
Is that how we're wrapping it?
No. Okay, I'll just cut it though. All right, Pat. Eastern Conference done. We'll be back with the Western Conference. You can check that out. It'll be on the same page. We'll have the West as well. Pat, it's going to be a fun one. Glad to talk with you again, and we'll be back all year, huh?
Yeah. Let's get the puck drop. Let's do this.
For Pat Pickens, I'm Dave Turner. This is Puck Talk with Pickens and Turner, our Eastern Conference preview. Okay, so
how long did that go?
Like 35 maybe. We're a little long in the middle there, but that's all right. I mean, it wasn't terribly long. All right, so let's just jump into the West and do pretty much the same thing.
All right, one sec. Start the intro. I'll be right back, okay?
Okay, I'll wait for you to get back.
All right, whenever you're ready.
Cool. Hello and welcome to the Western Conference preview edition of Puck Talk with Pickens and Turner. I'm Dave Turner along with Pat Pickens. Pat, how the West will be won is a question that will be very interesting this year because we've seen teams kind of regress a little bit. Maybe other teams are finally ready to make that next step. But to me, just automatically, the West just seems so wide open this year, and I think it's going to make for some great hockey.
I think the East is a lot more clear-cut than the Western Conference, and the Western Conference has been the power conference the last few years. But like you said, there's probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 12 teams out west that could make the playoffs, and probably 8 of those can consider themselves cup contenders.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of it because there's so many teams here that really can make a run. But we'll start with the Central Division here.
The best division in all of sports, according to you.
Yeah, I said that last year, and I'm going to stick with it because look, who are your worst teams in this division right now? You want to tell me Winnipeg maybe is the worst team, or Colorado? A lot of talent there. Dallas has improved. Yeah, I mean, to me, there's no weak link there. But we'll start with the St. Louis Blues first. To me, this is the make or break year for this team. They kept the coach, and that's the thing that I've warned about with the San Jose Sharks is that they kept McClellan the whole time. Sometimes you have to hit the reset button while you still can. For me, St. Louis, this is the year that either they do it or it's time to kind of blow this thing up a little bit, which I think they could. To me, Jake Allen is the guy who's going to be the difference. I know Elliott's getting the start now, but I think if this team is finally going to take the step forward, it's because they're going to get the goaltending that they've never really had in the playoffs. Allen He's been through it now a little bit. Didn't look good, but another year of just being able to play some more games, I think, helps him. Look, defensively, this team is tremendous still. I mean, the Shattenkirks and the Petrangelos and the Bowmeisters are so good. Losing TJ Oshie, if you look at really what he did last year, I don't know if it's necessarily a huge loss. They still have guys, the Schwartzes and the Tarasenkos. To me, this is a team that has the talent, but the question is this the next San Jose Sharks? Are they a team that has all the potential in the world and they never get to realize it?
That's been St. Louis's MO basically since they entered the league, though, is the thing. I think, like you said, St. Louis's defense is elite. We'll see what Scott Gomez provides too, because he made the Blues. They announced Wednesday they signed a 1-year deal. I think I agree with you with the goaltending. Is it Elliott? Is it Allen? When you go through fantasy drafts, you don't know who to pick because Hitchcock hasn't settled on a goalie, and Elliott's going to get the first start. But basically, that whole thing, uncertainty doomed them last year because Allen was in goal and he wasn't good enough in that Minnesota series for the games he played. I don't know. Troy Brouwer went through a lengthy goal-scoring drought, and I think he's a downgrade from Oshie. There's still, like you said, some talent to overcome that. Tarasenko's poised for another step forward, if you believe it. Paul Stastny didn't have much of a year, but we'll see what he brings. Scotty Upshall, consummate pro winner, been to the Cup Finals. I agree with you that they're going to regress. There's just a lot of big, tough bodies there, and that defense is really, really nasty. I don't think they're going to win the Central Division this year, but I think they're probably a playoff team.
Yeah, I don't want to say they're not going to win the division just because there's questions for the other teams. I think you could almost make the case, maybe not Winnipeg and Colorado, but at least the other teams, you can make a good case that any of those teams are going to win the division, and I really don't know if I could tell you no, but it'll be interesting. Looking at Chicago now, to me, Chicago, they have the core, and I've always said this, that as long as they have those big guys, the defensemen, Hossa, and then, of course, Taves and Kane, that as long as you find enough parts that can kind of get it done night in and night out, they don't have to be great, that they'll be right there. But I think with what they lost this year, it's going to be tough for them. Oduya is a guy who was better than people can almost give him credit for. Losing a guy like Brandon Saad is not going to be easy to replace. Hossa is another year older. Then, of course, all the off-season issues with Kane, which we're not going to get into, but certainly something that could affect this team. And even losing Sharp. They bring in a guy like Daly who could certainly fill the void left by Oduya, but I don't know. I think we've seen it from this team in years past, that every time they win the Cup, they kind of take that year or two to get back into it because they have to kind of get rid of guys with the salary. Chicago will be right there, but I don't think that this is their year. They'll be a playoff team, but I really wouldn't count on them making a deep run this year.
I like Trevor Daley a lot. I like the decision to he's going to help that power play a lot, I think. I think the biggest issue, and they kind of braced for this, they dealt with it last year with Kane injury, is whether or not he actually ends up being suspended, and what comes out beyond that. I mean, you look at what happened with Slava Voinov last year at the Kings, and that was basically the start of the season that fell off the tracks there pretty quickly. I wouldn't be stunned to see Chicago regress, like you said. What that means, maybe they don't make the Western Conference Finals this year. I think there's more than enough talent there. They got a lot younger. They got a lot deeper with some of the moves they made with the Saad trade. I know that Marco Dano didn't make the team, but he's still in their system. Ryan Garbutt's going to make them a little tougher. Whether how they deal with their young defense. I mean, they basically with bubblegum and duct tape, they survived that defense last year. I agree. You look at their roster, and the names look a lot different. Duncan Keith's still there. Brent Seabrook's still there. Jonathan Toews is still there. It's just whether the goaltending's good enough, and like you said, whether Marian Hossa ages. I think the Blackhawks finished third in the Central Division last year, and I think that's probably a safe pick for where they'll finish again this year.
Yeah, I would agree with that, but there's just part of me that thinks that they don't really have what it takes to make a run this year. But it wouldn't surprise me at all because they still do have that core of that team. And look, Host has been, he's like fine wine. It gets better with age.
Yeah.
Just the way, who would have thought a few years ago when he was in Atlanta that he would become the two-way player that he is. It's been amazing to watch what he's done and even evolve his game as he gets older and he loses a step. But look, they're going to be right there. I just don't know if they necessarily have what it takes to go back-to-back, which is just so tough, and there's so many factors that really have to play out in your favor to go back-to-back. But moving on to Minnesota now, you know I was bullish on them last year. I think I'm actually going to do a 180 on them just because Dubnyk was such a reason why they got there. And even if Dubnyk had what did he finish? He had almost a 940 save percentage with them, and I don't think he in a full season, especially with maybe a little bit more tape on him and that sort of thing. If he's a 924, 925 save percentage guy, that means they fall back a little bit. He was so good at the end of last year for them that he stole games night in and night out. If he's good but not great, I think they take a step back. I like this team. I love some of the grit. I do like some of the defensemen that have started to come around a little bit with this team. But I don't know. I just don't really see them as a contender. Are they a playoff team? Yeah, probably. But you could even make the case that they might not make the playoffs out of this division just because of how tough it is.
Dubnyk was a 936 in Minnesota last year. He was a 916 in the 19 games he played in Arizona. I'm sorry, did I say Minnesota or did I say Arizona? 936 in Minnesota, 916 in Arizona. He was an 850 goalie in 2 games in Nashville while Pekka Rinne was injured. But his career, to your point, is not – I mean, his career – save percentages are not great. 889, 916, 914, 920 better, 894. But for him to go from 936, I agree there's a regression in play there for Dubnyk, of course. He can't. But at the same point, I really like Minnesota's team. You look at their roster. Their roster's full of good players. Niederreiter, spectacular. Pominville, sharp, with Parise, the tenacious, and Granlund on the top line. I agree with you that I think this team is very good. I think Thomas Vanek is still there, which is both a blessing and a curse. Their defense is solid. Ryan Suter, basically was Duncan Keith before Keith last year. The only thing that I really don't like about Minnesota is, are they built for the long haul in the playoffs? I mean, if you look at, basically, although the counter argument to that is, they've only lost to Chicago these last few years, and they beat St. Louis last year. So I don't think they're heavy enough to come out of the Western Conference is my concern.
I would agree with you on that, actually. I think that they'll be a playoff team, but I just haven't seen enough from them to really believe that they're going to take that next step forward.
They're undersized, and I agree there's a regression coming from Dubnyk. I think they could win the Central Division. I think I could see that with the talent they have. But the other question ultimately with Minnesota, and maybe we'll get to this either down the road, is when is their window is quickly closing here. I mean, they're at the point where they're going to be like good but not great, and that's just going to be their ceiling.
Yeah, I think we're getting close to that, where maybe this is their year too, which is interesting because you could quite possibly have a St. Louis and Minnesota playoff series again, with maybe not the situation of the Chicago team looming. And one of those teams might have to win it. Boy, would that be interesting if that's how it ends up.
Or even where the pressure is flipped, where all the pressure was on St. Louis last year. And now maybe it's on Minnesota this year. I don't know. We'll transition quickly. I really like the moves Dallas made. I think Dallas is kind of the sleeper in that division, and maybe they're not because but they were not a playoff team a year ago. They still have Jamie Benn, who had more points than any player in the NHL last year. Oh, by the way, his center is Tyler Seguin, who's arguably the best player in the or offensive player in the NHL. They shored up the goaltending. They gave Lettinen a little bit of competition with Antti Niemi. Again, goaltending going to be an issue. I think Patrick Sharp playing a more offensive role, but maybe playing with Spezza. I mean, that would be a fun little position there with Hemsky. Maybe they provide some offense, but also two-way play. They shored up the defense with Oduya. They did lose Trevor Daley. I like Trevor Daley.
He's an underrated player, Trevor Daley. I don't think he's ever gotten the props he deserves.
But I think their young defensemen are very good. And Valery Nichushkin, we have to see him for a full season this year because he was injured last year. Dave, I like Dallas. I mean, they could come out of that division.
talent-wise, I love this team offensively. I mean, they're going to pour the goals on. Yeah. If you have a night where, if you have the NHL package and you have a night where you're hanging around, watch the Dallas Stars play. Yeah. You're going to be entertained. They're going to play a really fun brand of hockey. Here's the two things that scare me about this team. One, the goaltending. You have Lehtinen and you have Antti Niemi, who has proven Niemi at times that he can be very good.
Cup winner.
Yeah, Lehtinen last year was not very good. Here's my thing. Early on, you give both guys a chance to start. You give them, you flip-flop games. You let them both play. At some point, you have to pick one of them to be your goaltender, and you have to stick with it. Because, look, if you go 20 games, say, and then all of a sudden you make Niemi the starter, and then all of a sudden 2 weeks into his starting tenure, he gives up 4 and 5 in consecutive games, and all of a sudden you go back to Lehtinen. That's scary because then all of a sudden you go back to if you have two goaltenders, you have none sort of thing. Yep. It can be done right, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen. The other thing that scares me about this team is there's a lot of personalities there. And if this team struggles or if they, if all of a sudden things go wrong, look, Patrick Sharp, for what it's worth, who knows what really went on. I'm not going to get into that, but he's a guy who knows. Seguin is a little bit of a wild man. I just wonder if this team has the leadership that if they struggle, especially if they're scoring and the defense and the goaltending isn't there, that there won't be infighting and that kind of thing. I just wonder if there's enough veteran leadership for this team to get through a full season and to take that step forward. That being said, I think they're going to have a very good year. I absolutely believe they're a playoff team, though.
Yeah, I agree. I there's merit to what you're saying, especially when you consider that there need to be guys in the room policing that stuff, and it seems like the Stars have embraced all that. The other thing that concerns me about Dallas, and I think we'll close with this, is that Jim Nill wins the offseason every year, but what has that amounted to? 2 playoff wins in 2 years now, and we'll see if they can take that next step in the third. Speaking of teams that took the next step, basically were the Nashville Predators a year ago. They finished second. They were atop the Central Division for a long time before ultimately being caught by the Blues. Dave, they're a bunch of nobodies except for Pekka Rinne in goal and maybe Shea Weber on the blue line. What do you think about the Nashville Predators this year?
I mean, goaltending, Pekka Rinne, when he's on, is a sensational goaltender. They have 3 defensemen that you can make the case. Look, Seth Jones will be even better this year, I believe. Roman Josi, I think, is the most underrated defenseman in the entire league.
Well,
we all know what Shea...
At least
but
it could be
Strawman.
At least the West. Yeah, it could be Strawman. Could be Josi.
That's true. That's true. You can make that case, absolutely. But Shea Weber is great too. But offensively, they're just such a ragtag bunch. I mean, Mike Ribeiro with some of the off-ice issues with him.
Yeah.
James Neal, who loves to show up or not show up at any given point. Forsberg, who can he take the step forward? We saw some good things with him. But now he's going to be the guy, and we need to see if he can do that. Mike Fisher, he kind of always seems to be hurt. And then after that, you look at this team, and you're like, is there anything that really instills confidence in you? Look, I'm a big believer in you build from the net out, and if that's the case, especially I do like the coaching there too, this team should be good, but I don't know if they're going to be a playoff team. There's a lot of teams that could certainly finish ahead of them, but in the same regard, who knows if I could see them finishing second in this division as well. I think this is a team that could really run the gamut from having a pretty good year to really falling out and maybe having a much more disappointing year than they expect.
I think that also could hinge on Pekka Rinne's health because Carter Hutton's still the backup at goal. And if Rinne's going to miss any substantial amount of time, you saw what it did 2 years ago, they're going to be in trouble. Now we'll go to another darling of last year, Winnipeg. Dave, the Jets kind of rode the wave of that, basically off of the Kane trade, the Evander Kane deal to Buffalo, and they kind of rode that, and of course good coaching with Paul Maurice, into a playoff spot. The Jets to me kind of felt like the Stars of the year before, where they kind of survived their goaltending. Can they do it again? And there's a lot of controversy there with Byfuglien and Ladd in terms of contracts, apparently.
Yeah, I think this team is due to really fall off. You look at them offensively, there's not much there that you say is that elite level kind of scoring. Their first line's good. The Wheeler, Little, Ladd line is pretty good, although I know Ladd's been a little bit banged up at least. But after that, Stafford's a really nice depth player, but he's not going to wow you. Defensively, though, here's my thing. We know what Byfuglien can do. Enstrom's a good player, too. If Tyler Myers can finally take a step forward, and look, there's been people who have been saying that for how many years now, but with a full year in a training camp and a new system, if Tyler Myers can finally realize that potential, maybe he's a dynamic player for them that keeps them in the mix. But look, even goaltending is up in the air for them because Michael Hutchinson looked really good at points last year.
Yeah.
I don't know if Andre Pavlik has enough to do it, but to me, this is a team that will be right there. But I don't know, Pat. Do you agree? I can't see them being a playoff team this year.
I don't see them being a playoff team this year. They're not built for this year, which is weird because there's a lot up in the air, like you said. Their goaltending behind Pavlik is maybe a year behind with Hellebuck, and you mentioned Hutchinson, and their prospects in goal are looking bright. But the strange thing about that is they're looking to build off a playoff year. I mean, obviously they were swept, but a playoff year, and goaltending might be their biggest problem. So I agree with you. I think they're going to finish somewhere in that. I think they're going to finish probably sixth in terms of the division. And they're only going to finish out of dead last because everyone's favorite whipping child, Patrick Waugh and the Colorado Avalanche, who still don't care about analytics, are going to finish dead last because for as much offensive talent as there, this team gives up a ton of shots still. Not a lot of moves in the offseason in terms of improvement from my vantage point. Varlamov's still fantastic in goal. Francois Beauchemin may be better defensively, but you still watch this team. They still give up way too many shot attempts. Is the offense, is McKinnon going to take that step forward? Is Landeskog's going to improve? Are they going to get more? Is Carl Soderberg better than Ryan O'Reilly? Because that's what they're banking on, because they traded O'Reilly and then they gave big money to Soderberg. Actually, less money than O'Reilly got, but big money to Carl Soderberg. I think it was 5 years and $30 million, which is $6 million for Carl Soderberg. Not necessarily a move I would endorse. I think the Avalanche finished last in the Central. That doesn't mean they're a bad team, but they're not going to be very good.
I agree. If we were making superlatives here, I would have the Colorado Avalanche as the most likely to become a dumpster fire at some point. I just know it is. It's like they looked like they were coming along, and I love Tyson Barrie, who had a great season last year, even though he was a little banged up, and he's banged up now too. But offensively, they're not nearly as deep as they were a couple years ago too. I mean, they have the young guys, but after that, it's Jerome McGinley and who. And you got to expect that he's going to start to fall off too. I don't know if you can expect another year from him where he does much. To me, this is a team that, especially with the coach that we know at any point he could fly off the handle, considering who they're going to have to play in their own division, I think they could be in for a really, really disappointing year that ends up getting some people fired and them probably hitting the reset button, to be honest.
Well, here's the real question, though, is because Patrick Waugh is both the coach and he's an alternate VP of player personnel. He and Joe Sakic share that title. Can Sakic fire Waugh as the coach since they're both basically on the same level as player personnel developers? I mean, it's going to be fascinating to watch, just because of the fact that these are two of the greatest players in the organization's history, and I think they're going to be a mess. So. Even the good news about the Central Division is even the worst teams are going to be fascinating to watch. Now, that's kind of the story of the Western Conference, though, I guess, because everyone's favorite to win the Cup this year is coming from the Pacific Division, for as good as the Central is. Dave, the Anaheim Ducks are a sexy pick to come out of the West. They've improved on their playoff spot every year. They missed the playoffs in 12. They were out in the first round in 13. They were out in the second round in 14. They were out in the conference final in 15. 7 games, by the way, in all 3 of those playoff series. Dave, why is Anaheim going to go to the Cup Finals?
I think they finally found their goaltending, and I think the young defense is going to be even better. You look at this team, and sure, they got rid of Francois Beauchemin, who was a good mainstay here, but Hampus Lindholm is going to be a really good player. So is Cam Fowler, Sami Vatanen. We've seen what he can do. I like this team defensively, and now with Frederik Andersen in goal, and they have other options if they need to in goal. Also, they're strong down the middle too. Mm-hmm. I mean, Getzlaf and Kessler, and then they got a guy like Horkoff and Richard Rackle too. I like this team. I wasn't big on them last year, and I'll admit, after watching them in the playoffs, I really started to get what they were about. Carl Hagelin. I mean, look, you put this guy on this team with guys who can pass the puck to him. Carl Hagelin is going to have some highlight reel goals this year. Again, he's an incomplete player at times, but with the speed aspect, I think he was a nice thing. Silverberg, I think, is going to take another step forward this year. I really liked what we saw from him. Yuri Sekach is another guy. There's a lot to like about this team, and LA to me is still a question mark. Chicago, I think, is going to have a down year. So to me, it's almost a natural progression that the Ducks' time is right now.
Okay, I'm going to play the devil's advocate then, because I think the Ducks are flawed. I mean, every team obviously in the cap era is flawed. You mentioned the goaltending, but where does Anton Khudobin fit in that mix? Because Anton Khudobin is arguably a starting goalie, and I agree with you that Andersen is the guy, but all of a sudden you put a starter caliber backup in there, and the question marks start flying. You mentioned the young defense, but Beauchemin had tailed off substantially, I would say. Maybe not substantially, but enough. And all of a sudden, Clayton Stoner is going to get more minutes. And Sami Vatanen, we're going to see, can he continue to progress? Can Hampus Lindholm continue to progress? Simone Dupre is still there. Cam Fowler, terrific. But, there are some question marks there. And then the offense. You mentioned Hagelin. Hagelin's not an offensive player, and they gave up a young, bright power forward in Emerson Edom. I know Edom didn't play much out there. They never played more than 45 games in an NHL season. But Hagelin is not an elite offensive player. He's a good penalty killer. He's a good third or fourth line player. But all of a sudden, the talk becomes, is he a top 6 in Anaheim? No, he's not a top 6 player offensively. He scored 17 goals. His go-to move on a breakaway is the slap shot. So I think the problem they're putting a lot of stock in Carl Hagelin. He's a great speed player. He's an elite penalty killer. He's a solid all-around bottom or maybe top 9 forward if you go like second, third, fourth line. But you can't expect a whole lot offensively from Carl Hagelin at this point. Maybe we'll see a progression from him. But I like the Ducks. Don't get me wrong. The Ducks are loaded at every position. Defense, forward, Getzlaf, Perry, fantastic. But the Kessler money is going to hamstring them. Is that second line? Is Hagelin going to play with Kessler? And if so, does that become a defensive line or an offensive line? They may have some. I mean, I agree with you. I like Silverberg a lot. He's a big weapon in the shootout. But if a lot of games aren't going to get there, then maybe he regresses a little bit. Again, maybe I'm playing devil's advocate here, and maybe they're poised for a big year. But I wouldn't be stunned to see someone else besides Anaheim win the Pacific.
It'll be fascinating if that's the case. It's funny how both of us switched so much on this team. I think we were almost polar opposites last year, and all of a sudden I'm big on the Ducks and you're not. But
don't get me wrong, all it takes is a 23-2 stretch to flip me on this. But
but I can go the other way too.
Doesn't matter though, because it's all about the playoffs for the Ducks this year too. And
exactly.
Their biggest playoff foil is the Los Angeles Kings, and the Kings made some pretty solid moves here, Dave. With when you look at Milan Lucic, hasn't done a lot, but it seems like the Kings are like the fountain of youth with some of these with the Gabricks and some of the moves they've made. They lost Sekera, who was a rental, but they picked up Christian Ehrhoff, who, by the way, is apparently jumping from 1-year deal to 1-year deal. Dave, where do the Kings fall for you? Because there's a huge question mark with them.
They are. This is a team that I think could be right back in it. But here's the thing. We've never seen this team be dominant in the regular season. Mm-hmm. Even when they were winning their Stanley Cups quite recently, they were never a team that was absolutely pulling away with it. So
didn't even have home ice.
No, and for I guess the question is, Will we ever see them do that? Even if they have a better year, which I do think they will, they've never shown us anything to say that they're going to go out and be a big-time regular season team. And for them to do what they did in the playoffs and stare death in the face and come out on top many times like they did, it didn't work last year. And that's the question with them. Look, Milan Lucic with Gabrick and Kopitar, that's a pretty damn good line. The second line with the 70s guys with Carter, Toffoli, Pearson, all healthy, is nice. Dustin Brown has fallen off a little bit. They don't have a guy like Jared Stoll to win faceoffs. Defensively, they're good, but I don't know. Outside of Drew Doughty and Ehrhoff's getting a little older, I don't know if they're necessarily the great defensive team they were a couple years ago. And of course, the question is Jonathan Quick a Tim Lincecum, or is he a guy, to use a baseball reference, of a guy who kind of had the crazy style and can he keep it going? Or is he a guy who's going to settle in? I think the Kings are going to be fascinating because there is talent there, but what are we going to get from them?
The big question is going to be is how long can you tolerate Daryl Sutter? I mean, there was talk about a revolt last year that happened, and he's still out there. He's still the head coach behind the bench. Remember where they locked him out of the dressing room in Tampa, I guess was the story. If they don't get off to a good start, he's a polarizing guy, and his job was in jeopardy 2 years ago when there was talk, and then they won the cup, and it kind of stayed that. But if they're revolting against him, and they get off to a tough start, who knows? And then who knows who's pushing the buttons. But I like the team. I think they're a playoff team. Quickly, we'll get to a team who had a darling of a year last year, but we only expect them to improve, Dave. Calgary, where everybody, all the stat heads said this team is poised for regression, and it's true, they were. And then they just upgraded their defense by getting Dougie Hamilton. Dave, Calgary might have the best defense in all of hockey. They might have the best young forwards in all of hockey. How do you feel about the Flames?
Normally, I would say that this is a team that's going to regress a little bit just because it happens. But I really like what they did in the playoffs last year. Vancouver was not a great team, but they were a much more veteran team. And they went out and they closed it at home in Game 6. You got to like that from a young team. Then they played a series against Anaheim where they were clearly not on the same level as them. But they scrapped a little bit, and they didn't quite lay down and get swept. I like what we saw from that team. Now, all of a sudden, look, you get Michael Frolik, who is a pretty solid player who only makes him better. Sam Bennett's going to be around for the whole year now. They have some pretty good depth. And, of course, Sean Monahan, who I happen to really, really like, he's going to be a star by the end of this year, a bona fide star. I really think he's a guy who could be in the conversation with some of the better centers in the entire league by the end of the year. I think it's just natural for him. And looking at them defensively, they have so many guys that can move the puck. I mean, really, of course, TJ Brody is hurt right now, but I think this team's only going to get better. I really do.
I think this team I'll get to it more later. The Magic, that's Johnny Gaudreau, Sam Bennett, who I picked actually last year to be the Calder Trophy winner. I guess he still can be because he didn't play all that much at all, but he showed what he can do in the playoffs. I think Calgary's going to win the Pacific.
That would be fascinating. It really would be. I don't know if I'd go that far because I do think
the only question mark I have is who's the goaltender?
Mm-hmm.
Is it going to be Ramo? Is it going to be Hiller? I mean, Hiller is solid, but there are a lot of goalies out there that if there was the opportunity, I mean, Calgary, I guess, could have done it in the offseason too, where there were, the Talbots and the Lenners and those types of goalies. But if there's the opportunity for them to go get a goalie, by the way, Craig Anderson pointing at that. Don't be stunned if Brian Burke and company go do that.
I could definitely see them making a move for a goaltender if that's.
I'd say the most fascinating team in the entire sport is going to be Calgary's provincial mate in Edmonton, just because the unfortunate injury to Jordan Eberle is there. But by the way, arguably the greatest player to enter since Sidney Crosby is there. They're closing their building at the end of the season. And they still have all that top six talent. They added Andre Sekera. They added Cam Talbot in goal. Dave, what do you make of the Oilers?
I think they're going to be fun to watch. Eventually, it's going to stick. as much as they've had trouble trying to get some sort of cohesiveness, the fact that they brought in the people they did in the front office
Yeah.
and the coach with McClellan, I think is finally going to help them where they
Mm-hmm.
can get some sort of normalcy, that it's not just a bunch of young guys running around trying to show that they're good at playing hockey. There's going to be some sort of system here now. Are they great defensively? No. Do we really know what we're going to get from the goaltender Cam Talbot? Of course not, because he played in front of a really, really good team with the Rangers, and it's not going to be the case now. But defensively, Clefbaum, Schultz, Sekera, Mark Fane, Griffin Reinhardt, they're okay defensively. Offensively, Connor McDavid, I think, is going to make a splash right away. I really do think he's that kind of talent that he's going to be able to just come in and make some things happen. I don't know if I want to say that they're a playoff team, but they're going to be damn fun to watch this year.
I think that's the biggest thing is that they're going to be relevant. They're going to be fun to watch. And the line combinations, and you want to talk about 3-on-3 overtime. Where do you was you going to put Sekera with McDavid and Nugent Hopkins? Or how about, let's see, Taylor Hall and McDavid and Nugent Hopkins, or Yakupov we could put out there too, who we haven't mentioned at all.
Yeah, now Yakupov, when he scores in 3-on-3 overtime, can slide the entire length of the ice because there won't be people there to block him.
No question. Or when Eberle returns, who knows? They could put Eberle with Nugent Hopkins and Yakupov, 3 forwards, try to win the thing. I think the Oilers are going to be fascinating to watch. I think their opener is against St. Louis, which will be also interesting. Television when you see what McDavid. By the way, number to watch, Sidney Crosby had 102 points his rookie season for the Pittsburgh Penguins. We'll see if McDavid gets anywhere near that this year. While we're staying in the Pacific, let's go west to Vancouver, where we both expect a regression in Willie Desjardins' second season on the job. Dave, I think the Canucks played up just because their coach wasn't John Tortorella anymore. There were some moves that the Canucks made that were, frankly, questionable. They traded Bonino, and they got Brandon Sutter. They traded Eddie Lack for some reason. And this basically stinks like an organization without a plan. I feel bad for Willie Desjardins because the guys really like to play for him out there. If Bo Horvat can be a second-line center, maybe this is a team that can get in the mix. I don't think they're going to get anywhere near the playoffs, though.
No, I really think this is the year they fall off. Why? Ryan Miller has shown me nothing that he's going to be able to put together a big-time season anymore, and he's not getting younger. Mm-hmm. So I think that's going to be an issue. And then, look, the Sedins at some point are going to start to fall off.
Mm-hmm.
If they don't put up a tremendous year, I don't even think they sniff the playoffs this year. They had a good season last year, and there's something to be said about that. But they had a little bit, a decent amount of roster turnover. And just when you look at this team, I mean, Radim Vrbata, but with Bo Horvat centering them, I mean, to me, there's just not a lot to be confident in outside of the fact that the Sedins are always pretty good, and maybe Ryan Miller can put it together for one more year. But yeah, I'll agree with you. I don't see much coming from Vancouver.
The defense isn't very good either. We'll quickly go south to San Jose, where more fascinating. Peter DeBoer is behind the bench there in San Jose, and there's still that dichotomy of young versus old, where Joe Thornton and Patrick Marleau are still there.
And new captain Joe Pavelski.
Yeah, and in goal, former LA King Martin Jones, who gets the opportunity. Dave, Sharks are going to be fascinating. I think they could be a dark horse, especially since that Joel Ward signing looks pretty good to me. Paul Martin shores up the defense. I think they could be a dark horse to make the playoffs. What do you think?
Yeah, there's something about this team. I think all of a sudden they're going to be a little bit more of a heavier, defensive-minded team. If Jones can play well enough in goal, I think you're going to see a team that's going to play two-way hockey. Look, defensively, maybe they don't overwhelm you, but I still think there's guys who have a lot to prove there. I mean, Logan Couture, who kind of maybe hasn't taken that step yet. Who knows? The only thing that does really interest me with this team is what is the Peter DeBoer effect going to have on this team? We know that he's a guy who preaches defensive hockey, and I think that style can really work for the Sharks and make them a better overall team. But what about some of the young guys? Thomas Hertl, who had a good first year, and that last year he was hurt and all that kind of thing. Barclay Goodrow, Chris Tierney, young guys again. What are they going to be able to do? Mark Edward Vlasic, who looked like he was really taking a step forward, was even on Team Canada in the Olympics. He looked kind of human last year. Do you think DeBoer and his style is going to make them a better team? Because I'm going to lean yes, but I'm worried about the development of the young guys with this team, though.
I think that this team is perfectly matched for DeBoer just because they're more of a veteran team. They're not a lot of young players, but they're NHL veterans. And DeBoer, we all know, has had trouble in the past with young players. Hurdle, I think, could be a problem. Vlasic has NHL pedigree, though. I think this is a good fit, although it could go off the rails rather quickly. But I think San Jose improves. I think San Jose is a playoff team actually this year.
I won't disagree with you, but I think we'll have to see what they can do. I think coming out of the gates, they've got to be strong. They've really got to set the tone. If there's any team that needs to come out and just play well and get some confidence, it's this team, because I don't know if they can dig themselves out of a hole if they get into one. Arizona
will close. Austin Matthews is from Scottsdale, Arizona. He's playing in the Swedish Elite League, and that's where if everything falls right for the Coyotes, they'll land him with the number 1 pick next year.
Yeah, this is, again, not much we need to say on this team other than the fact that I like their young talent, where they're in the beginning phases of a good rebuild because they have some very nice young pieces. But that being said, it's going to take a few years, of getting some more good draft picks and that kind of thing. But you know what? Look, it's a rebuilding year. Enjoy it for anyone who does show up there for their games, because considering they're not going to be a contender, enjoy it, because these are some of the young guys that are going to be part of this team in the future moving forward.
Yeah, okay. Team to step forward, Dave, out west.
For me, this is a tough one. I think I'm going to have to go with Calgary just because I was so big on them last year. I actually picked them to be a playoff team last year before it started, and I guess I got lucky. I think they're really going to be a contender this year. Some of the teams like Chicago, St. Louis are going to take a step back, where if you look at Calgary, outside of maybe Anaheim, who could finish ahead of them, I think this is a team that is going to go from being a playoff darling to a team that no one wants to play in the playoffs. I think just looking at the young guys on this team, Calgary is going to be a team to reckon with.
I agree. I told you I picked them to win the Pacific. The only thing that concerns me is the heavy play against teams like LA. I'll go with Dallas because I like the move. I'm a big fan of Jim Nill. I think Niemi is going to be the goalie, and Niemi can play, all right. And it may not even matter because they'll have the offense to overcome it. I like the Oduya trade. I like the return they got. They got Sharp, who's that leader kind of in the dressing room. Oduya, I think, is solid. They have veterans to surround the young players, and I really think the young defense is going to rise up. Don't forget this: the Texas Stars were the American Hockey League champion, I believe, in 2014. So there's a lot there in their system where we're going to start seeing some young kids from Dallas pretty quickly. How about a team to regress?
For me, it's going to be the Chicago Blackhawks. And no, I'm not going to go as far as to say they're not going to make the playoffs, because they will. But I just look at this team and what they've lost. Sure, they got some pieces back, and they are a younger team, but I think that they're another year away from being a real true contender again. I think just how much it takes out of you to win like they did. I don't know, especially because we've seen it where they haven't been all that great the year after as well. I don't know. I just think that Chicago, especially with some of the offseason things with Patrick Kane, we don't know how that's going to affect this team. I think they're as much as they're going to be a playoff team, I just don't think that they are going to be a team that we even see in the conference finals this year. I think they're going to have a down year for them, a year that a lot of teams would love to have, but for them, a down year.
I think there's going to be a huge sideshow when he goes on the road, and I think we're going to see it Friday night when they play the Islanders. I think don't sleep on the distraction of road trips and having to answer all those questions. I agree with you. Chicago, I'm going to pick Winnipeg to step back. They were a playoff team last year. Paul Maurice, I like. I think the goaltending is a big problem. Maybe we see Hutchinson supplant Pavlik. Maybe we see Hellebuck at some point. Hellebuck, who was so good at World Championships. I like Mark Scheifele. I don't know if there's a lot there. Burmistrov from the KHL who knows? You know, they're going to be excited up in Winnipeg because they always are, but I think we're going to see a regression from the Jets, not necessarily because they're bad or they got worse, but because it's kind of like Dallas last year. Dave, compelling storyline for you in the West.
I'm going to kind of go a little bit on Dallas here, but my question is, can they find the defense and the goaltending? They scored a ton of goals last year. They're probably going to score more goals this year. They're going to be absolutely entertaining to watch offensively. But for me, can the young defensemen and can they find the goaltending between Lettinen and Niemi? That's going to be the difference between Dallas being a decent team and maybe a fringe playoff team, or perhaps being a real legitimate contender. If they can find a way to keep some pucks out of their own net. I mean, look, if they give up 3 goals every night, chances are they're going to win quite a few of those. If they can cut it to 2 most games, they're going to win a hell of a lot of hockey games. For me, I think that team, if they can find the defense, will be so good offensively that they could really become a contender if the defense and goaltending is there.
I'm going to stick with you in goaltending, but I'm going to go north and say it's St. Louis because Ken Hitchcock hasn't named a starter of Brian Elliott and Jake Allen. We saw how Allen struggles in the. I mean, they basically flipped between the two of them in the playoff series with Minnesota, but Allen's awful play in Game 6 was really the difference and what knocked them out in a do-or-die game there. St. Louis, we discussed a lot on the line for them. Ken Hitchcock's job is probably on the line, and probably his position as an NHL head coach is on the line. I think that St. Louis. I think we talked about it off air, and you said it a little bit on air that Allen has to be the guy, but Elliott's there, and Elliott had such a good year. And if they don't choose one, that it's going to just be lingering and just it's going to be over their head. You know, just there. And the fact that they don't play, the fact that they struggle and lost the playoff series with both last year, I think is going to make this a bigger problem.
Yeah, I do think that they are just so fascinating this year because I think it has to happen for them this year or there's going to be major changes. But Pat, right before we get out of here, out of the West, who is going to be playing for Lord Stanley's Cup?
I'm going to go off the board with this one, and I'm going to say Calgary. A lot of people like Anaheim. A lot of people like LA to rebound. But maybe I'm going just a little off the board just to be different. But Calgary's depth, we talk about down the middle. And their centers are fantastic. Their defense is very good. Their young playmakers take a step forward. And I think they get enough goaltending in Hiller to get, or Ramo, whichever, to get them there. I don't know if I believe it, but I'm going to pick Calgary to come out of the West. Dave, how about you? In fact, I would choose Calgary over Dallas.
That'd be a hell of a series. For me, I'm going to go with the Ducks just because I think that this is their year. They were so close last year against Chicago, and I think that this is a team that knows what it takes. You know, they're a good defensive team. I think the goaltending will be even better for them this year. They're gonna win a ton of games, and I think that they will be hungrier than anyone else to win the Ducks. I think this is their year. Who knows? I mean, they do have their warts, but I really do think it's going to be the Ducks when all is said and done. So for me, it's the Ducks and the Capitals. So Bruce Boudreau, very familiar with both sides of that one. And for you Pat, what you're saying is for the first time since 1993, a Canadian team will win the Stanley Cup if it's Montreal and Calgary. That'd be a fun one.
I would agree. It's partying like it's 1989, I believe, with Calgary and Montreal. I would take Montreal to win that series, and we'll qualify that by saying we always reserve the right to change our pick as the year progresses.
Yeah, I mean, there's going to be a lot that's going to change, but that's the beauty of it, huh?
I guess so. Let's drop the puck, Dave.
Absolutely. For Pat Pickens, I'm Dave Turner. This has been the Western Conference Preview. We'll be back with more Puck Talk next week.